Commercials suck, right, guys? Go to myfuneralhomestories.com and get the first 3 seasons of My Funeral Home Stories commercial free, plus a 45-minute epilogue for $8. All that money goes back to me, and you'll help make new episodes and new seasons of My Funeral Home Stories. Go to myfuneralhomestories.com and enjoy this episode.
The following account is real. Names have been changed to protect the living and the innocent. This journal contains language and content that may not be suitable for all listeners.
What is death really? The end of life? The beginning of something else? Who knows? It's so pretentious and abstract when you really try and talk about it. The more you try and wrap your head around death, the more likely you are to end up with a headache or chronic depression. I've found that it's hard to explain away a professional and personal fascination with death to outsiders. Explaining my work at the funeral home to someone new in my life is often met with one of two expressions. Either a look of disgust and horror, a typical shitty closed-minded response, or a great big smile because the person I'm talking to is also a deranged weirdo who's fascinated by the darker side of life. I prefer the second reaction, but I've seen less and less of those lately. Everyone in my life is over the fact that I work at the funeral home, and honestly, so am I. I feel as if I'm stuck in one place being forced to live the same day over and over. Every day is exactly the same, except today, because I just got dumped, and I may have contracted AIDS from a dead body. Is this really my life now? My name is Grant, and these are my funeral home stories. Chapter 15, The Train Track Sleeping Bag. Thursday. It's 12:14 a.m. I just pulled up to the funeral home for the second time in under an hour and hopped into the van with Ned. We're on our way to pick up a body found down by the train tracks near the post office. It's only a few minutes away. I should be home in about an hour. Ned's driving. I'm sitting in the passenger seat. My stomach gurgles. I forgot to eat tonight. Guess I was a little distracted. I'm tired tonight. Like, exceptionally so. I haven't been sleeping well because of this goddamn cut on my hand, and it's starting to drive me crazy. It's not so much the pain that's keeping me up at night, it's the worry. After my incident in the prep room with Mr. Ryan this week, I've been imagining spending the rest of my life living with AIDS, which is challenging because I really have no idea what the treatment and lifestyle of an AIDS patient is actually like. If it's anything like the musical Rent, I'll have a sweet lofted apartment and open up a restaurant in Santa Fe at some point in the near future. I look down at my pants and realize I never zipped them up when I left the house tonight. As an adult, I'm learning that the more tired I am, the less likely I am to zip up my pants. Thankfully, I'm wearing semi-athletic boxer briefs by Ralph Lauren. Otherwise, I probably would have given J-Mike at the hospital quite a show. Thank God I have tonight off. Well, tomorrow night off. I guess, technically, it's still tonight. It's confusing, but in just about 17 hours, I'll be off with a cocktail in my hand and a 90-pound yellow lab companion shedding and slobbering all over me. Tonight was supposed to be Mary and I's date night to get drunk and watch Grey's Anatomy, but considering how well our conversation went about a half hour ago, I think Carter and I will be watching Grey's Anatomy alone this evening. I wonder if Mary will try and reach out tonight. She did sound pretty emphatic and decided about the breakup before I clicked over to take this death call. Maybe she'll call me to tell me she didn't mean it and was just overwhelmed by school and life. I doubt it though. Mary thinks about decisions before she makes them. She's not as impulsive as I am, so chances are she's been wanting to do this for a while. Hey, and that's totally fair and her right. She didn't sign up for all of this when she started dating me. When we met, I was an aspiring drummer who worked in a funeral home to pay the bills, and lately it seems like I'm an aspiring funeral director who happens to own a drum set. She doesn't want a life of vacations and holidays centered around death and dead bodies. I get it. The funeral industry isn't for everyone. I know. I think I'm actually more hurt and surprised by the fact that she was fucking some other guy while she was still my girlfriend. I never really pegged her as the type of person to do that. Thinking about Mary that way makes me feel gross and dirty. How many times was that Mike guy with her when I called to say goodnight? Ned fiddles with the radio, turning the dial through static. There's a freshly made stretcher sitting in the back of the van, squeaking and bouncing as we drive. The van still smells like the faceless bag body I picked up from the hospital just about 45 minutes ago or so. Even though Mrs. Downing's body has been out of the van and at the crematory for the last hour, it still reeks like her river waterlogged, decomposing body in here. It's like rotten meat, but a lot more complex. Way more damp. There might be some sweet notes in there too. I'm shocked that even with all the front and back windows open, Mrs. Downing's funk continues to linger. Oh man, did she leak out of her body bag and into the van? I hope not. All my fingers on my right hand are sore now, not just the one with the slice. It's a constant radiating pain moving up and down my arm. As much as I don't want to admit that I might have an infection, I might have an infection. Well, other than the infection I'm already freaking out about. AIDS. I'm looking out my open passenger window, but not really paying attention to anything in particular. We're driving through downtown right now, and there's barely a car or soul in sight. It feels like we're moving through a ghost town with working traffic lights. I'm thinking about how an hour ago I had a girlfriend, and now I'm on don't ever fucking talk to me again terms with Mary. What the hell happened? Obviously, Ned called and forced Mary to give me a fairly hasty ultimatum. But before that, she did make a fairly convincing argument about me spending more time with dead bodies than I do my own girlfriend. Either way, since Ned called me while I was being dumped, I'm gonna hold him partially responsible, because why not? Ned finally lands on an AM station. He usually listens to sports talk, but tonight he's listening to something much cooler. It's one of those call-in conspiracy shows. You know the type. One guy talks to a guest about some weird shit and then opens up the phone lines for listeners to call with all their freaky stories and experiences. The program is made all the more creepy because of the AM hiss and static that's intermittently clicking and popping over the broadcast. The topic of conversation is aliens living among us and how there's a growing population of them being left behind to run amok and spread like parasites until human beings become the minority. Ned and I look at each other, both of us shaking our heads out of disbelief for what we're hearing on the radio, but I'm sizing him up. I wouldn't be shocked to find out Ned's an alien. It would explain so much. You believe this shit, Ned? I ask, head tilted in Ned's direction. No, Grant. I've been cutting into people for over 40 years, and if aliens were living and dying among us, I surely would have stumbled across one in a prep room by now. Wow, he had that answer queued up pretty quick. He must have thought about this before. Or he's an alien. Ned focuses back on the road and fiddles with something on the dashboard. We're getting close now. We pass a couple outside a parking garage having a very loud argument. We're moving a little too fast for me to make out any words, but the body language tells me everything I need to know. The woman's frustrated mannerisms remind me of Mary. It must be something about the way she's throwing her hands and arms around. You know, Mary's right to not want to be with me, no doubt about it. The more I think about things from her perspective, the more I feel guilty. It's no little girl's dream to grow up and marry a funeral director, or whatever the fuck I am, a funeral director's assistant. There are always people in life that give you a weird look or reaction when they find out your family owns funeral homes. In those moments, it's hard to tell if people are passing judgment or if they just want to ask how realistic 6 Feet Under is. I didn't watch it, so my answer is always a disappointment. Mary never seemed too bothered by the funeral home other than when it would directly affect our date nights. I think her decision to dump my ass has a lot more to do with her friends and family being creeped out and uncomfortable by my family's chosen trade. Or it has nothing to do with the funeral home, and I'm projecting all of this to avoid thinking about what is most likely the case for Mary's sudden change of heart. She upgraded. A gust of wind blows into my windows, circulating the soggy, decomposing meat smell in the van. Now I'm sure that some of Mrs. Downing's fluids must have leaked out of the cot based on the concentration of the smell. It's getting worse. I asked Ned where we're going. Did they give you an address? Ned shakes his head. No, dispatch just told me to go to the post office and look for the lights. I nod my head and stick my hand out the window. The wind feels good blowing through my bandage, tickling my cut. I pick at one of the corner pieces that's peeling up a bit with my thumb. I'm not even meaning to do this. It's like I'm on autopilot watching myself peel up one of the edges. Clearly, I'm fueled by nervous energy and exhaustion tonight. The adhesive on the bandage probably started to give way when my hand was sweating inside the glove at the hospital. I continue picking and think about what Ned just told me about the call we're going on. Go to the post office and look for flashing lights? Generally, when dispatch tells you to go somewhere and look for lights, that means a body was found somewhere without an easily identifiable address. But train tracks keep getting mentioned, so I'm assuming it has something to do with that. I wonder if it's going to be one of those ultra-messy train track calls I always hear about from the other directors. I've never seen anyone chewed up by a train before, not even in pictures. I'm not sure what I want or expect out of this call. The more messy it is, the longer it's going to take, which will delay my bedtime even further tonight. But if it's a literal and figurative train wreck, it might take my mind off of Mary and possibly having AIDS for a while. Give my worried brain a little relief. About an hour ago, I passed the point of exhaustion where I'd begin a thought and then immediately lose focus and forget what I was thinking about. I feel like I'm on drugs even though I haven't done any this week, which is kind of a shame. I'm also inexplicably hot and clammy. Maybe I'm just getting sick. Wait, are fatigue, fever, and clammy skin early signs of AIDS? Ned and I turn off Main Street to go up one of the side streets by the post office. We immediately see the lights. I don't care how many times I've done this, I still get nervous pulling up to a death call. You just never know what you're gonna walk into or what will be asked of you. A la accidentally sticking my fingers in an old lady's head in front of her friends and family on the 4th of July. 2 patrol cars, an unmarked detective's car, and a crime scene investigation van are parked next to a set of train tracks set in from Douglas Street about 15 feet off the sidewalk. I must have walked past this spot 100 times on my way to the post office over the years. Weird, I never noticed there wasn't a fence keeping pedestrians off the tracks. Isn't someone legally obligated and accountable for keeping people from getting killed out here? Is that a city thing? It should be, right? I mean, the city council just tried to pass a law to put fences around all residential swimming pools. So if the city considers pools to be dangerous enough to merit fences, why wouldn't they treat train tracks and public spaces with the same reverence? I guess it's because kids and animals fall into pools and backyards and drown way more often than they walk into train yards and square off with fully loaded locomotives. So which would be worse, drowning or getting run over by a train? I play a little game in my head weighing the pros and cons of both causes of death. The act of drowning sounds terrifying, but more than likely you'll just pass out from lack of oxygen before you actually die. I think that's what happens. I've never actually drowned before. A speeding train, on the other hand, is a whole different ballgame. It's so loud. The engine, the whistles, the steel wheels grinding against the track. I try to picture myself standing on the tracks near my house and imagine what it must feel like to know that in a matter of seconds you're about to be destroyed. Getting hit by a train would be a much faster way to go than drowning, but the last few seconds of your life would be harrowing to say the least. I suppose the same argument could be made about drowning given the circumstance. Why do I think about drowning so much? It's always fascinated me. Probably because I grew up with a pool, or because my grandpa dry drowned and was legally dead for 10 minutes when I was a kid. I think that might be it. My brain feels like it's running on Windows Millennium Edition right now. I need a serious defrag. As we inch closer to the vehicles near the track, I see one large light tower with 4 giant halogen lights pointing toward the ground near the tracks. In typical police call fashion, the squad cars are parked around the scene as a makeshift barricade, so we won't be able to see much until we're out of the van. Ned says, "This must be it." "You think, Ned?" I say sarcastically. He looks at me down his glasses like he's not amused, and he isn't. We slide to a stop alongside the police vehicles. There's an officer leaning against one of the hoods, presumably waiting for us. I've never seen this guy before. He must be a transfer. He looks a little too old to be a rookie. He's in his mid-30s and about 30 pounds overweight. He's kind of got a Mark David Chapman vibe about him. Well, he looks like Mark David Chapman. I guess vibe may have been the wrong term to use since I'm not sure how this officer feels about Jodie Foster. But that's neither here nor there. The officer walks over to us with a shuffle in his gait. He's also got a bad haircut. Bad isn't what I meant. It's a classic faux hawk. So it was a good haircut at one point, probably in his late teens, but now that he's an adult, it doesn't suit him, especially with as overgrown as it is. Ned turns down the radio and rolls down the window. "Hey Tom, how you doing tonight?" "Not bad, Ned," the officer responds. How does Ned know everyone on the police force? "I see you brought the boss's kid tonight," the officer says, pointing at me. How the fuck does this guy know who I am? I table my confusion and wave and say, "Hey Tom, Officer Tom, I'm Grant." "Hey, good meeting you, champ," the officer says with a wink that I find to be too familiar and off-putting. Champ? Who calls people champ? Ned knows this type of over-familiarity is a pet peeve of mine and chuckles when he sees my reaction. Officer Tom tells Ned and I that he's been on the scene for about 2 hours and he's ready to go home and have a couple cold ones. That sounds nice. I may do the same. I think I can get away with a cocktail or two after this. I realize I'm on call and that wouldn't be the most professional thing to do, but I just got dumped and I may have AIDS. So I'm gonna have a drink tonight. Plus, the likelihood of getting called out a third time tonight is slim. It's happened before, but I think I'll take my chances tonight. Ned and Tom have a quick conversation about the day's events in baseball, something I couldn't be less interested in if you paid me, followed by Ned asking, "So what are we doing tonight?" We got one white man, John Doe, early mid-20s, homeless junkie probably, laying in a sleeping bag on train tracks. The 9:30 westbound passenger train departed from Platform A about a half a mile away at the train depot. Cars were starting to build up a little speed and get moving at a reasonable clip when the engineer saw John Doe's black sleeping bag laying in the center of the tracks. His lights were on, horn blaring, brakes fully engaged. The engineer said it was too late to stop. He told the officer when he was questioned after the accident that normally under perfect conditions, a train of that weight can take a quarter or half mile to come to rest. Why the fuck was he in a sleeping bag? Was this guy camping out on the train tracks? Or was he drunk or something? The officer looks back at the tracks and responds, "We're not sure what he was on, but whatever it was, it's out of his system now." He was using the train rail as a pillow and somehow managed to lose both of his hands at the wrist. So, whatever drugs he took before he laid down are soaking into a couple of railroad ties via his blood. The rest of his body looks untouched though. The train passed just above him. Oh, that's interesting, I think to myself. I wasn't expecting that. I always assume that when a pedestrian gets hit by a train, it blows them into a million pieces. How could it not? Is the space between rails really deep enough for a train to pass right over a body laying below it? I can feel myself filling with excitement. I cannot wait to see this body now. He had his head on the tracks? What's that gonna look like? What's gonna be left? And where were his hands that he lost both of them? I just kind of figured they'd be in the sleeping bag. I wonder if he passed out there. I think about all the times I've been fucked up and passed out in unfamiliar places. I usually try and grab a couch or a bathtub. I wouldn't think a train rail ever, unless I didn't want to wake up. There's no way this guy just happened to fall asleep or pass out on these train tracks. There's just too much noise and commotion. Plus, it doesn't seem all that comfortable. Ned and I unload the stretcher from the van and walk it through the grass and gravel next to the giant halogen fixture. I can hear the hum of the lights above us. We park the cot next to the tracks. Unzipping the stretcher and reaching for gloves, I get my first glimpse at John Doe's body. From my vantage point, it looks like someone's taking a nap in a fairly decent sleeping bag in a bizarre location. The sleeping bag looks pretty new. It's nothing too fancy, just a black entry-level Coleman. It's similar to the one I had when I was a kid. I rarely ever used it though. I'm not really the outdoorsy, camping type. The officers or first responders must have unzipped the sleeping bag when they got there, but didn't even bother to pull him out after they saw his head. It's gotta be a total mess if first responders didn't even make an attempt to save the man's life, right? I'm doing my best not to irritate my sore right hand any further while also not taking a spill on the uneven gravel around the ties. I finally get a good angle. It's more disgusting and visually aggressive than I anticipated and prepared myself for. Fuck. The top of this guy's head is lopped clean off, just about an inch above his eyebrows. There's blood everywhere, on the rail, the ground. The sleeping bag is actually absorbing quite a bit of it. I notice the man's arms, handless and above the man's head. Oh, I see what he did here. He laid down on the tracks and put his wrist in the train's path as well. Was this his contingency plan if the giant wheel wouldn't have crushed his head? Or did this guy figure he'd check as many suicide boxes as possible, eliminating any chances he'd wake up? David Foster Wallace's suicide comes to mind. All of this man's wounds are very clean. Some of the skin looks ripped around the man's forehead, but for the most part, I'm surprised at how clean these slices look. That train must have been moving pretty quick. It's kind of weird to look at some of the skin that didn't tear as smoothly as the other parts. I imagine this feeling like a giant hangnail if you were to survive. The man's facial expression is not of surprise or regret. He looks calm, zen almost. Do you suppose he was running from something and suicide was his only viable option for relief? The look on his face suggests that he wanted to be here. How could you maintain such a stoic expression when an 800-ton death machine is barreling straight for you? I don't know. Maybe he passed out and didn't kill himself. The hands could be a suicide, or maybe he was asleep. I sleep with my hands above my head all the time. He was probably just trying to get comfortable. I look at the other side of the rail and see the top of John Doe's head and hair. Chunks of brain and flappy skin meat, along with 2 medium-sized adult man hands. It's fucking weird. They're just laying in the gravel between 2 railroad ties. Ned dives right in and scoops up John Doe's skull cap and brain matter and puts it into an orange biohazard bag. I reach for John Doe's hands. I pick them both up, his right and my right, left and left. Okay, so this is a bizarre feeling. Have you ever shaken hands with a hand that's not connected to a body? It's weird. John's hands are about the same size as mine. His obviously much dirtier with grime and gunk under the nails, but we do share some similarities in the hairs on our knuckles. I squeeze the right hand as if I were shaking it as I place it into the bio bag. It literally just feels like a dead fish with bigger bones and tougher skin. This is just too bizarre. I drop the hand in the bag. The rest of the death call was pretty simple. We just tucked his arms and head into the sleeping bag and placed the sleeping bag into a disaster pouch. I'm puzzled by this death call. The smells were that of blood, mostly that ammonia smell, and dirt, earth, and shit. All those things are very natural, but the call just felt wrong. Maybe it's my mind state. Maybe it's my lack of sleep. Maybe it's my paranoia. Maybe it's this whole fucking Mary thing. It feels weird. I wonder if John Doe was drugged or poisoned by someone and placed on the tracks. I just couldn't imagine choosing to take my own life via train. It's just so crazy. I have so many questions without any answers, and so is the life of a funeral director. Excuse me, a funeral director's assistant. Back at the crematory, Ned and I get Mr. Doe put into a cardboard cremation container and move his body into our walk-in cooler that also has Mrs. Downing's smelly, waterlogged body. Along with being attacked by all the odors coming out of Mrs. Downing's body all over again, I notice a pool of dark red and blackish liquid gathering on the floor under her container. Shit, I was right. Mrs. Downing was leaking. Looks like I'm scrubbing the floorboards inside the van tomorrow. Yippee. We lock up and leave. Driving back to the funeral home from the crematory, the stink isn't quite as overpowering as it was an hour ago. Or maybe I'm just getting used to it. Ned turns down the radio and says, "Sorry about the other day with Mr. Ryan. I hope you're not freaking out too much. I accidentally cut myself when I was your age and practically gave myself an ulcer worrying about what I may or may not have had. I feel like I cut myself all the time and barely sweat it now. Which probably isn't what I should be telling you, but I should have made it clear about the whole AIDS thing when you came in the room to help." I look at Ned surprised. His honesty in this moment provided me more comfort than I've felt in 3 days. You don't have to apologize. I was careless. I learned a lesson. Plus, I haven't even thought that much about the whole AIDS thing since Mary dumped. I hesitate. I don't really want to say that Mary dumped me out loud yet. Once someone else knows, it's no longer just Mary and I who know we're broken up. It's an actual breakup. Mary what? Mary dumped me. Because of the AIDS thing? You don't even know if you have it, though. No, Ned. Surprisingly, it didn't have anything to do with AIDS. I didn't even get a chance to tell her. She just hates the funeral home. She doesn't think it's normal or a healthy lifestyle for her. Ned's inquisitive look turns to that of annoyance as I finish talking. So, she broke up with you because of your job? The thing you do to make money? The thing your family has done to make a living? And a damn good living for that matter. And she doesn't want to be with you because of the lifestyle? Fuck her, Grant. She'll never get it. People like her look down at people like us. They think your job is gross and disgusting, and in turn think you're gross and disgusting. Be happy she told you now, Grant. She saved you a ton of time, money, and energy. We pass a billboard for Hot and Fresh on our right. 2 double cheeseburgers for $2 and big yellow block letters in the corner that read, "Open 24 hours. Ned says, "You hungry?" About 5 minutes later, Ned and I are the 4th car sitting in line at the Hot and Fresh drive-thru. It's 1:14 in the morning. Why did everyone decide to go to Hot and Fresh right now? Well, I guess there's only one restaurant open 24 hours in the city limits, so the crowd makes sense, but it's annoying. Ned just ordered 4 double cheeseburgers, 2 large fries, and 2 Diet Cokes. He didn't even ask me what I wanted. He just ordered. I'm only a little annoyed by this. I'm just happy not to be stuck at home scrolling the internet looking for clues of Mary's infidelity or searching for results to a blood test I haven't taken yet. My bandage is all but peeled up from the constant putting on and taking off of surgical gloves tonight. I peel the rest of it off, feeling the tiny hairs pull out of my knuckles in the process. I think about John Doe's hands and the tiny, tiny hairs on his fingers. My fingers are still tender, but the cut looks like it's healing up nicely. No dried blood, no gross scabbing, just a single half-inch slice trying its best to mend itself. We're finally at the window. Ned pays and the attendant runs to the back to grab our food. The window slams shut behind her. The radio host that was talking about aliens an hour ago has switched topics to the paranormal. The discussion now being dead relatives with unfinished business. Spooky. From where I'm sitting in the passenger seat, I can see the corner where I picked up the foreign exchange student who was stabbed 77 times and had his genitals mutilated before being pushed out into the hot summer sunlight. Mrs. Jones was so mad at me about that speech. I got like a week of after-school detention for that shit. I wonder if she's still alive. The drive-thru window opens again. Ned grabs the food and sets it on the floor of the van. The smell of hot and fresh has now replaced the smell of Mrs. Downing's stink. And as it does, a wave of bad feelings washes over me. I'm overwhelmed and practically hyperventilating quietly to myself out the window as Ned drives out of the hot and fresh parking lot. I'm not thinking about the stab wounds to that foreign exchange student's head or even about John Doe's train wheel crushed cranium leaking blood and brains out into the gravel. I'm not thinking about any of that. I'm thinking about Mary, all the trips we took, things we did, the plans we had for the future. It's all gone. I guess the gravity of the situation finally hit me. I feel hopeless. Everything went sideways this week. Everything. If this is what being an adult is, I don't want any part of it. I snap out of my pity party just long enough to hear the host of the AM show say something profound, even if I am unaware of its original context. He said, "Sometimes it's hard to tell when it's the end. At some point, you have to realize that it's time for a new beginning." Ned reaches into the bag and throws a piping hot double cheeseburger on my lap. "Here you go, champ." I roll my eyes. I take a bite, and as my teeth pulverize the meat, cheese, onions, and condiments, I feel myself relaxing. Time for a new beginning, huh? Mrs. Downing's stink is now mixing with the cheeseburger inside my mouth. I try my best to ignore it. I take another bite of the cheeseburger and open my phone's contact list. I scroll until I get to Mary. Compose new message. I think for a second and then begin to type. "Mary, I'm so sorry." But then I look at the screen and think to myself, am I though? What am I sorry for? Having a job that's got tough hours and crazy scenarios? Where the fuck has she been lately? Salt Lake City, study groups, chemistry labs, lacrosse games? I shouldn't apologize, and I'm not going to for one simple reason. Mike Taylor. I delete the text and put the phone in a cup holder near the dash. Coda. Now I'm sure you're wondering about the AIDS scare. I went to my doctor's appointment on Monday and he told me that HIV and AIDS can be undetectable in blood tests for up to 90 days after exposure. He then reassured me that more than likely I have nothing to worry about. It's not like I got a blood transfusion from Mr. Ryan. I only spoke to Mary about a half dozen times or so after this night. She ended up dating that Mike guy for a month or two before all that fizzled out. I never cared enough to find out why or how it ended. Like, why would I? My name is Grant, and these are my funeral home stories. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please rate and review wherever you listen, and be sure to tell a friend. Follow me on social media at Pomo and Kitsch, and check out my album, Fetch by Pomo and Kitsch, available on the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to music. Thanks for listening.